friends, it's Carrie. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to do a weekly wrap-up video, but I'm only going to talk about 2 of the 3 books that I read this week because one book is about the John F. Kennedy assassination and tomorrow is November 22nd, so I'm going to do an entire video devoted to that book. The first book that I read this week was Pale Rider, The Spanish Flu of 1918 and How It Changed the World by Laura Spinney. The author of this book makes the argument that the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 was the most significant global disaster of the 20th century. She's basing that on the fact that somewhere between 50 and 100 million people were killed by the Spanish flu. So that far surpasses the death toll of World War I and World War II. Now, we don't have a definite figure on how many people were killed during the Spanish flu pandemic, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that some countries weren't actually keeping statistics on death rates due to the fact that they were so consumed with the war effort. Honestly, I didn't know a whole lot about the 1918 flu until reading this book, and I oftentimes treated it as kind of a footnote of World War I when going over this in history class. So I was really intrigued by this book. I did learn a lot. She does an excellent job of tracing the virus around the world, and she also does an excellent job tracing the geopolitical impact and the far-reaching consequences of this disaster. The author narrows down the likely origin of the Spanish flu to 3 different places: Kansas, France, and ironically, China. And I did know that the Spanish flu did not originate in Spain. Spain just happened to be neutral during World War I, so they were more apt to track flu data. And so they unfortunately bear the moniker because of that. Of course, the war naturally helped to spread this disease, and it probably impacted Germany's decision to back out of the war. The author provides some compelling evidence that it was one of the factors that led to Germany being compelled to sign the Treaty of Versailles. The author also makes the argument that Britain's lack of response to the flu in India may have led to the Indian independence movement, and it also may have led to the idea of socialized medicine in many European countries, which was very interesting and obviously leads us to some connections to modern day and some issues that we're having right now related to the current coronavirus pandemic. And some other interesting tidbits that I found in the book that made me think of the current coronavirus is the fact that the Spanish flu tended to attack those who were in the prime of their life. So those who were especially vulnerable to this were between 20 and 40 years old, which I thought was very interesting because usually we think of those who are very young or very old being very vulnerable to these diseases, and generally those are the ones who are vulnerable to the flu. But with the Spanish flu of 1918 and then of course with the coronavirus, we're seeing some differences there. This book also confirms why I'm afraid of birds, because birds actually have a role in this virus as well. There is a facility in Atlanta that does have the virus from 1918, and they have tried to study it to try to figure out why it was so deadly, because we still don't actually know that. We don't know a whole lot about why this 1918 pandemic was so devastating. And that's pretty scary that this event that happened 102 years ago, we still haven't figured that one out. Until the 1990s, it was assumed that viruses could not jump from birds to humans. And they finally found out that it indeed could jump from birds to humans, and that's actually what happened in 1918. So my fear of birds is very much founded, people, and it's confirmed in this book right here. And these viruses apparently tend to live in the gastrointestinal tract of birds. specifically ducks, domesticated ducks. But they think the jump from birds to humans is what made this disease especially virulent, and they think that's what made the immune response in humans so violent and so devastating. I really enjoyed this book. There was a ton of research that was done in this. The author does an excellent job of giving a global perspective of this global pandemic in 1918, and I would definitely recommend it. I don't know if everyone should read it right now. If you're someone who is very sensitive to this topic right now, I don't know that you would want to read it. I had no problem reading it. I found it extremely informative, and maybe you would too. The second book I read this week was Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, and this was published in 1929. It was based on a series of lectures that she delivered to some women's colleges in 1928 on the topic of women and fiction. It's written in Woolf's characteristic style of stream of consciousness. Mrs. Dalloway is on my Libby loan shelf. But this is actually my first experience with Virginia Woolf, and I actually enjoy that style of writing, the stream of consciousness style. So in the opening of the book, we follow Virginia Woolf as she is strolling along this meadow, and she is contemplating what to say in her upcoming lecture. Absorbed in her thoughts, she strays away from the gravel path, and she is silently chastised by this man that she encounters. The reason she's chastised is because the Oxbridge turf belongs to men. So she's literally in a turf war. She uses that term Oxbridge as a reference to Oxford and Cambridge, which are the two oldest, wealthiest, most prestigious universities in England. So then she decides to go to the library, but she's also denied access there as well. And this is the part that just about tore me all to pieces. I obviously understand the time period, but it just hurt my librarian heart. So the literary tradition at this time had been dominated by men with the argument that women's fiction was inferior to that of men. So Woolf's essay just exposes the societal norms and inequalities that would have made it extremely difficult for women to write at all, much less write extremely well. Even for wealthy women of the time, intellectual pursuits were often interrupted because the spaces that women were relegated to were often shared spaces, so common areas. And so if you were in the middle of some sort of task that required sustained concentration and creative thought, it would be very difficult to accomplish that. Whereas a man of the era, he typically had a private study, and so he didn't have to worry about household tasks or household chores or children. Woolf does comment on writers of the era like Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters, and she is pretty much blown away that they are able to write such high quality fiction, considering that they were writing under these circumstances. In one part of the essay, Woolf actually invents a fictional sister for William Shakespeare, and she is trying to highlight the struggles of women trying to develop their craft. Spoiler alert, Judith Shakespeare's ending is fairly haunting because this fictional character does end up committing suicide because she is unable to fulfill her creative path. And in 1941, Virginia Woolf also commits suicide, and so I found that kind of eerie. This is deemed an iconic feminist text, but don't be scared off. I don't feel like it's a rant. I do feel like you need to take historical context into this as well. She is writing this the same year as the 1928 Equal Franchise Act, which gave all women in Britain over the age of 21, regardless of property ownership, the right to vote. So it is in the midst of the suffrage movement, so I can understand if some of the writing seems a bit angry or a bit ranty, but it honestly didn't read that way to me. Woolf has a very comic way of dealing with some of these issues, and so I really enjoyed this book. And it's very short, so it's a very quick read. Woolf succinctly sums up what female writers need. 1, they need a room of their own, and 2, they need financial independence. I would take this a step further, and I would say that anyone, male or female, who wants creative autonomy and freedom should have those things. There is a growing trend in America where more and more young adults are dependent on their parents or other family members to provide for them long into adulthood. And you can go into historically kind of what has happened there and kind of analyze that, but just in general that has become a trend. And I would say that when you live under someone else's roof, like it or not, you are beholden to their expectations. And when you live off someone else's money, they can and often do critique you, and they make demands and can make demands on how you spend your money or their money. So if you're a young adult who has family support, I would say appreciate it, utilize it, further your education, and acquire skills and jobs that set you up for financial independence. Because the key to confidence and creativity is a room of your own and financial independence. And that is what Virginia Woolf was talking about, because she talks about confidence being key. And they're all inextricably linked in my mind. That's just coming from an educator of young adults who are about to go forth into the world. That's my weekly wrap up. I hope that wasn't ranty, but I will hopefully see you all tomorrow for my JFK assassination book that I read this week. It's called Betrayal in Dallas, LBJ, the Pearl Street Mafia, and the Murder of President Kennedy by Mark North. You know you want to tune in. I will leave you with my favorite quote from Virginia Woolf's book. Lock up your libraries if you like, but there is no gate, no lock, no bolt that you can set upon the freedom of my mind. But don't lock the libraries, people. The library should be open to all except the censor. Who said that? John F. Kennedy said that. Thanks for joining me. See you next time, guys.